Hey, I am Carl T. Rogers, the Storylosopher.
No.
Hush.
I'm the Storylosopher.
By the end of this video, you'll know how to format a phone call in Screenplay Format.
And how each of these techniques tells the story differently.
Don't interrupt me.
Me?
Phone calls. So we've talked about intercutting already, but I want to remind you that just because you have a phone call doesn't mean that you have to intercut. Because unlike in real life, you can kind of use phone calls differently in cinema because of all the creative liberties and stuff that we can do with the movie magic. For example, you can have the intercut, like we've talked about, where you see each character, you hear them talk, and you make it appear as if they're in the same place visually so that it's easier to read that they're having a conversation, even though they're not in the same place. Also, you could have it to where you focus on one character, but you hear the other person talking as if you are the character on screen. This was Jill talking to Bob, something like that. We can hear Jill's voice because we're in the room with Jill, but then we also hear Bob's voice through the phone as if we are Jill. In that case, you would use voiceover. They might be in the story, which is, not always how you would use voiceover, but they're not in the scene. So that's why it's not off screen. They are not in the scene, in that they're not in the room with Jill. But we're still hearing it as if we're Jill. So it would just be like regular dialogue between the two of them, but whoever's on the phone is voiceover. And you can also have it to where you can only hear one side of the conversation. You can hear what Jill is saying and not what Bob says. That is a third way that you can do a phone call. So it really just depends on how you want to reveal and conceal information. Another thing to keep in mind with phone calls is sometimes you might have somebody talking on the phone to somebody, but there's other people in the room. And you'll have somebody, just like in real life, you'll be talking on the phone, and then you have to hold the phone to yourself, and then turn to the person next to you and said, sorry, I have to take this. And then you turn back to the phone and you keep talking. You don't want the reader to be confused about who is being spoken to. So if you want to distinguish who's being spoken to, then you would use a Riley. Talked about intercuts, like I said, so there's several ways you can do that. Use the one that is most suited to the scene. If you absolutely have to, if you don't want to intercut, like perhaps there's some type of narrative reason why you need to be showing a character when a certain line is delivered, then you can just cut back and forth between the two locations with continuous in the slug line. Right here, we have this, which is the intercut that we already talked about. One of the ways you intercut, where you set up one location, you set up the other, and then you intercut while they talk. Another way is you've already started a scene. This is from Get Out. So we have somebody, they're doing something up here, and then his phone vibrates, intercut that with, and then we cut to the next scene, and then the rest of this is just assumed to be this guy from the previous scene talking with this guy into this scene. And so that's another way that you can intercut with a phone call. Conversely, you have this, which is somebody is talking into a phone, but there's other people in the scene. So you want to make sure that Roxanne is not talking to Jackson, who's in the room with her, and that she's instead talking into the phone. Right, so we have it in the Riley so that we are clear on who is being spoken to. And then we have this. It is off screen because the person who's talking into the phone is off screen, not because her voice is coming from the phone. Okay, so if Alice was talking to someone else, if Alice was talking to Jackson and we're looking at Jackson and Alice is only on the phone, then this would be voiceover. But instead, I think in this scene this is one of my scripts, Jackson is outside of the bedroom and Alice is inside the bedroom, so we're just watching Jackson while he's listening to Alice. Alice is talking on the phone. We already know that she's on the phone, but we're looking at Jackson while he's doing that. So Alice is technically off screen because she's in a different room. But this, just like this, is an example where you can only hear one side of the conversation. We can't hear what Mrs. Phillips is saying. We only hear what Alice is saying. I know this might seem like a ton of detail and a lot of minutia and really kind of special. Like, oh, well, if it's this way, then you do this, but if it's that way, then you do that. But once you get used to using this type of visual language, as it were, this type of formatting, then you'll be able to kind of use it at your disposal without having to think too hard about it.
Okay. That is the 411 on how to write a phone conversation. 411, is that too old? Am I dating myself with that? Well, if texting is more of your speed, then check out this video on how to format a texting conversation in your next screenplay.